My knee is still hurting from when we took that guy, when we took the trainer out and we got through the door, we all jumped on him.
Ooh.
I landed up on my knee.
Where was it?
Remember when we did the live shooter?
Oh.
Yeah, I
landed
landed
up.
up.
Put on and I missed it.
Oh, yeah. We did a security thing for
okay.
the holidays. What we did was we did a live shooter drill like they do in office buildings.
We did a drill.
We did a drill in the sanctuary.
Oh,
yeah.
That was absolutely amazing.
So you smashed already?
Well, we
As a
trained as to what to do. You know, if a guy does get through, first of all, how to keep him from getting through the door, assuming he can get through all the security we got outside, come through the door. If he does come through the door, there's a technique that, and Yossi was on one side of him, and I was on the other side, and Dan was in the middle of him. The guy came through the door, and everybody's throwing books with these foam balls, but if it was reality, we'd be throwing books at him to get him to look to the left. And as he comes through, he looks to the left, and I get him behind the knees, and the other two guys get him down that way. I mean, he went down like a rocket. It's a good thing he was wearing a helmet and all. But we did it twice, and it shows that anybody could do it.
That's good.
He was good.
Right, no matter how big and strong you are, your knee will buckle with a little pressure on the back.
Yeah, he was probably 6. I would say he's probably 6 inches taller than the rest of us.
Right.
Didn't make a difference.
Yeah.
Really?
We knew what.
Everybody's vulnerable at the back of their neck.
Stretch him so he looks the other way.
Even if you don't have your
We
weight,
need to get him
like
to
on
drop,
that
and
knee.
then
Yeah. You can get a person to fall by applying pressure to the back of their leg.
left. So when he went down to the left.
You know, like
And
if
at that point, we had
you're
control
having your weight like on one knee,
Just like
that
that,
knee is
yeah.
vulnerable.
And
If
doing
you
the
have
knees,
it on
nobody
both
thought
legs,
of that.
You just try it at home. You think sneak up behind somebody, and all you do is like put your knee in the back of their knee, and then they'll fall.
right.
Yeah.
All right, let's get started. First of all, hope everybody's on a high. We're the day after Rosh Hashanah,
Yes.
and maybe even a little bit we learned sprinkled in, to our observance of the holiday. Now today is so the logistics. Take care of some of the housekeeping first. So this is the last class of the season. Next Wednesday is Yom Kippur, and then so the 2 Wednesdays in a row, which are right after Yom Tif, there'll be no class.
Right.
And then we'll start the week following Parshas Noach. We'll start Parshas Noach again with our Wednesday classes again. So we have a 3-week break with class off, and then we'll reconvene for the next. I think this might be like something like our 11th or 12th season of doing.
It might be more than that because the shul is open. It's the 14th year.
Right, but I'm only here since 2004.
Yeah.
So I think it's either 11th or 12th. I don't know if I started right away or if it took me a
I
little while
think
to
you
get
did.
started. Yeah.
It was pretty quick after. Yeah.
So tonight's class is actually a fascinating class for a topic that I'm personally fascinated in. It's about motivation and how to make the most of motivation. One thing I've in the past brought statistics for how many people as a percentage of the population make New Year's resolutions, and what are the nature of New Year's resolution, and the dismal success rates for New Year's resolutions. So the same thing is true. It's a Jewish custom as well that when it comes time for Rosh Hashanah, it's a time to reflect on the year that has passed and to resolve to do things better in the year to come. So tonight we're going to have a fascinating insight into the spiritual high of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, which we're now in the middle of those days, spiritual high of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and the connection, the lesson that we learn from the mitzvahs of Succos, and how the mitzvah of Devin's here. So how the mitzvah of Succos gives us guidance on how to make the most of times of motivation, times of and really it's true not just Rosh Hashanah. We'll see how it's an approach really for all life. How to make the most out of inspiration. Now, Yom Kippur, which is last week's class and where we're headed to next in the holiday season, Yom Kippur is one of the most widely observed of all the Jewish holidays. I think in America, Pesach is the #1 most widely observed holiday, followed by the high holidays and then Hanukkah. That's like our big ones here in America. But you see that at least in the shul, when you just have total head count, when it comes time for Kol Nidre, when it comes time for Ne'ilah, these are the biggest crowds of the year. Yizkor. Yeah. So you see that this is not just true in the shul of West Bloomfield. This is pretty much true of Jews all around the world. They make a unique effort for this time of the year to attend services. Now, part of the inspiration, part of the, let's call it motivation, I don't want to overuse the word inspiration, but part of the motivation for coming to shul in these times is to reflect on our relationship with God, to think about where we're holding, a time of introspection. So Yom Kippur is this intense day, right? Now, this is not a Yom Kippur class, but just as a way of getting the connections, Yom Kippur is a pretty intense day. It's a day marked by fasting. It's a day marked by Yizkor. It's a day where, it's more solemn. It's a serious kind of day. Now, 5 days later on the Jewish calendar, we start the holiday of Succos. Now, Succos is a week-long celebration, which has its own special Yom Tov at the end, a special second Yom Tov, not directly connected to Succos, but part of it is Shmoneh Atzeres and Simchas Torah. But for a week, Succos is a festival where it's marked by joy and celebration. So we call it even Zman Simchasenu, the time of our simcha, time of our happiness, time of our joy. So we have this really stark contrast between Yom Kippur, which is serious and solemn and we're fasting, and then Sukkot, where it's joyful, it's celebration, and we say an extra l'chaim. One of the mitzvahs of Sukkot is that every day throughout the 7 days, you're supposed to do things that make you happy. And even the rabbis prescribe the kind of things that generally make people happy. That for children, you get them a new toy, you get them something sweet that makes them happy. For women, it says that a new article of clothing, something nice, a piece of jewelry, something that is beautiful, that makes people happy. For men, it says an extra l'chaim, that's something that makes us happy. So we do these things where it's very different from the way that we observe Yom Kippur. Now, one of the mitzvahs that we're going to focus on for tonight, for Sukkot, I just told you the mitzvah of Simcha and some of the ways you could do it, but one of the mitzvahs of Sukkot, and where Sukkot gets its name, is from the mitzvah to build a hut. I think that's how they translated a tabernacle or something, right? So you have a hut that you build, a temporary dwelling, and it's called a sukkah built on, the name of sukkah comes from the schach, the temporary roof that goes on this temporary dwelling that we're commanded to build. So that's where we start tonight's class with the text. It's from the book of Vayikra. It's where we find the biblical commandments, where you get the holiday's name. It says, Succos Teshvu, and this Shivas Yamim, for 7-day period, you shall dwell in sukkahs. You should dwell in booths. Every resident among the Israelites shall dwell in booths, in order that your ensuing generation should know that I had the children of Israel dwell in booths when I took them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So we have the commandment, we have the duration, and we have a reason. Now, it's a little bit of a debate amongst the rabbis as to why we dwell in a sukkah. So one way of you is that the Jews built temporary dwelling places for their times while they were traveling through the desert. Another way, which is less literal, is that the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, were forming huts for the Jews to live in. This gave them miraculous protection from all the elements throughout the harsh years in the desert. So whichever one it is, whether it's literally huts or whether it's these miraculous huts from the cloud of glory, and to remind ourselves of our time and the way we were protected by God while we traveled to the desert, that's why we fulfill this mitzvah. So if we look on the outside of how Yom Kippur is observed and how Sukkot is observed, there's completely opposite holidays with completely different ways of observing them. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are commemorating a particular date, right? Rosh Hashanah, we say, is the creation of man. We're celebrating the birthday of the world, as we say in our prayers. Yom Kippur is when Moshe came down with the second set of tablets with forgiveness for the Jewish people on the 10th of Tishrei. So those are what we call date-certain observances of something that we're commemorating. But Sukkos, if you see from text 1, is really a phenomenon that went on for 40 years. So you're not observing in the holiday something that took place on a particular date. So you have what seems like two holidays which are unrelated, independent of each other, observed in really polar opposite ways. One is very solemn, you don't eat, you pray the whole day. The other one is very joyful, and you're dancing and singing and drinking and eating. And the second holiday, the Sukkos, doesn't seem to have any reason to be on the 15th day of Tishrei. Has no direct connection thematically to Yom Kippur. Now, however, what we're going to see tonight is that it's not a coincidence. It's not just so we can get all the holidays taken care of in one time. That we will discover tonight a fascinating connection between Yom Kippur and Sukkos. And that the two holidays are, in fact, very complementary to each other in their observance. Now, first we'll start off with to show a connection between the two holidays in Jewish law. So we have a practice in Jewish law that immediately following Yom Kippur, immediately, like say you break the fast, you go home, you're supposed to be already busy with building the sukkah. So in my house, I store my sukkah in the garage. I have a lift and the kind of like it's a loft almost, but it's just for storage. And that's where I put my sukkah. And then so right after Yom Kippur, when I come home, I at least take everything down from the loft and put it to where it's going to go. I don't finish the project in one night, but at least I get it started to work on it. So we're going to see in the next text, 2a and 2b, that this is where we see a halachic, a Jewish legal connection between the two holidays. So the first text is from Shulchan Aruch, the book of Orach Chaim, the 624th chapter, the 5th halacha there. It reads, "Those who are scrupulous start building the sukkah immediately after Yom Kippur. In order," here's the reasoning according to the Shulchan Aruch, or the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch, "in order to go from one mitzvah to another." So we're connecting the dots of the mitzvah of Yom Kippur to the mitzvah of Sukkos, and as soon as possible to go from one mitzvah to the next. Now, text 2b is from Yosef Karo, where he writes in the Shulchan Aruch there in the following chapter, and the first halacha, it is a mitzvah to set up the sukkah immediately after Yom Kippur, for one should not pass up a mitzvah opportunity. Yeah,
is this before or after you break the fast?
After. Yeah.
But it says to immediately go from one to the other, so why isn't it the day after Yom Kippur rather than several days later?
Well, the immediately is the next day is right. the night after Yom Kippur.
Right.
So you're asking why do people put it up later?
Why is Sukkot start several days after rather than the next day?
Okay, so yeah, that's a biblical command. The Sukkot is a biblical holiday, and it gives it a date when to do it. Okay. What's the gap in between? Now, there's two mitzvahs, let's say. One mitzvah is the actual dwelling in the sukkah, but in order to dwell in the sukkah, you have to build one. So it's what we call a hechsher mitzvah. It's a mitzvah which prepares you for another mitzvah.
Okay, and it allows a certain amount of time to be able to complete the...
Right.
Got it. Okay.
Now, there's an interesting idea, and in Shulchan Aruch it says that people are so busy building the sukkah, acquiring their lulav and esrog, that there's no time to sin in between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. You're so busy with mitzvahs that, and unfortunately, nowadays, I was able to order my lulav and esrog online today. It took me like 2 minutes. And it'll be shipped to my house. But in the olden days, it was quite an event to get to your lulav and esrog. It took us all built, in between only 4 days. All right. Now, the Magen Avraham, in the next text, clarifies that even though the language may be a little different, we actually should, meaning the previous text, it gives you a little leeway. You should do it, and you should be involved, and don't let things pass up. The Magen Avraham comes more explicitly and says, when it says in Shulchan Aruch to set up, it means you should build the entire sukkah. So according to the Mogen Avram, you can't go to bed the night after of Yom Kippur until you're all done setting up the entire sukkah. Now again, my custom is at least to be involved. This is the Chabad custom, prevailing Chabad custom is just to be involved in the mitzvah, even if it means talking about it. You know, right? That's how little involved you could be, is just to talking. I'm talking about doing it, you know, and that's already doing it. Yeah, exactly. Now, so here, at least we see from text 2a, b, and c that there's a clear connection between the two holidays. We don't want to pass a mitzvah opportunity going from one mitzvah to the next. There's a clear connection between the two. So there's some element, even though, again, on the surface, they're very different holidays. And there's no commemorative element of Succos, which is similar to what we're commemorating or what we're doing on Yom Kippur. So what is the element that connects the two? Now, another way to ask the question is that we see that you go from Yom Kippur into Succos. So all of the big ideas that are connected to Yom Kippur are, in a certain way of thinking about it, a preparation to lead to Succos. So if we're not just looking for what is it that connects the two things, but what connects them in a way that it's linear, that you go necessarily from Yom Kippur to Succos. That's question number one. What's the connection, and what's the connection that one leads to the next? Now, there's more questions we're going to have in order to understand how to capitalize on motivation. The next question we have is, there's an interesting story in Chabad of the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe and his son, who would succeed him as the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe. So the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe is Rav Sholem Dover, and his son was Yosef Yitzchok Schneerson, both of blessed memory, the fifth and sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe. So the son, Yosef Yitzchok, who would be the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, comes to his father after the holy day of Yom Kippur, and he asks his father, "Father, what is the Seder Avoda now?" Meaning, what is the order of our divine service now? I mean, here you reach this crescendo of divine service, of work, serving Hashem spiritually. Now what do we do? So his father answered him, he says, now you can begin to do tshuva. So now you can begin to do tshuva. Now this is a question. This story asks the next question, which is, what does it mean now you can do tshuva? If you think about it, we've already gone through a lot of steps of tshuva. The first step we did is when it comes time for Rosh Chodesh Elul. We know that we're in the last month of the year. The year is coming to a close, and we already start with saying L'David Hashem Ori and extra Tzilim. We're doing extra things to prepare ourselves for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So there's a whole certain first phase of tshuva in the month of Elul. Comes the days of Succos, the last days of Elul, the last week of Elul. We come to shul early. There's a special rite before prayer. We say all these things asking God to forgive us. So we're doing tshuva with a whole public service the last week before Rosh Hashanah. Comes Rosh Hashanah, we begin what's called the 10 days of Teshuvah. With Rosh Hashanah, the first 2 days being the first 2 of 10 days of tshuva. You saw how much prayer and effort goes into that from the services of Rosh Hashanah. Now we're in the middle days. Today was a fast day, the fast of Tzom Gedalia. We have leading up to Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is like the pinnacle of all of this work that's been going on for more than a month. We're doing tshuva. So the story is very puzzling when the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, as a boy, asks his father, well, now what do we do after Yom Kippur? And he says, now, this is when you can begin to do tshuva. Now, I'm going to bring you, this is not, so you shouldn't think this is a Chabad problem, a Hasidic problem. You can actually strengthen this question from a phenomenal story in the Talmud. Now, in order to understand the story from the Talmud, we have to go a little bit of background information on sacrifices. So we have many different types of sacrifices. Now, one type of sacrifice is a way of, let's call it, saying, a way of looking for forgiveness from God. When there are certain things we're not supposed to do, and if we do them unwittingly, then there's a way to get atonement spiritually through the service of sacrifices. Now, the person, again, not doing it on purpose, but if someone mistakenly did something wrong, but they know that they did it wrong, it's called a carbon chotos, and the word chet, a sin. The carbon chotos is there to atone for certain transgressions. Now, then you have a whole different type of problem. The problem of a doubtful transgression, a transgression of doubt. What does this mean? So the example which is given is that if you have 2 pieces of meat in front of you at a table, and you eat one, and you consumed one of them, and then the other one is gone. Somebody else consumed it, or it's gone spoiled, or whatever the problem is, but you've only eaten one of them. So along comes the ritual slaughterer, the shochet, and he says, I hope nobody ate these pieces of meat because one of them wasn't kosher. But you don't know which one. You only ate one of them. And they weren't both not kosher, only one of them was not kosher. And there's no way of determining which one it was that was not kosher because they're both gone. This is the classic case the rabbis bring. So now you're in a case of doubt. Maybe you sinned, maybe you didn't. It's a transgression of doubt. If you ate the piece, then you certainly transgressed, but you don't know whether you ate it or not. So for such a case, we have what's called an asham toloi, a sacrifice which is a dependent offering. So depending on your means, depending on your station, you give various degrees of sacrifice. But whatever your station is, you give that to take care of your transgression of doubt. Okay, so that's a little bit of the primer on the sacrifices. So now, going back to the question, only after Yom Kippur, now you start to do tshuva. The story, we're going to strengthen the question on the story by seeing a Talmudic story. So the Talmudic story is here. In Tractate Krisus, page 25a, that it was said about the sage in Buta that he would offer an asham toloi, this sacrifice of doubtful transgression, every day besides for the day following. So every day he would offer an asham toloi. Why? So he said, I swear by this dwelling place that if they would allow me to, I would bring one on this day too. But they tell me to wait until I enter a place of doubt. So he's saying, I would really want to bring it every day. And on the doubt that maybe I've sinned. And even on the day after Yom Kippur, I would want to bring it. But they tell me, meaning they, the rabbis, they, the priests, tell me, I can't bring it on the day after Yom Kippur because that's a day when there is no doubt. Now, why should there be no doubt? So Rashi explains there in the Talmud, he says, during the rest of the year, there is room for uncertainty whether or not he committed a sin. But on this day, after Yom Kippur, there is no concern. Why? For Yom Kippur has affected atonement.
Just so I'm clear, that's the day, when we say day after Yom Kippur. So, for example, next Wednesday is Yom Kippur. We're talking Thursday. As opposed to Tuesday night, and Thursday being the day that there's nothing. You're saying it's the day after it's Thursday. Okay.
That's right. Yeah, so this year, exactly. This year, Tuesday night, Wednesday is Yom Kippur. So by Wednesday night, all the way through Thursday, our slate is clean. And even this great sage who has this pious practice to consider himself in a state of doubt every day of his life, the priest wouldn't take it the day after Yom Kippur because there's no doubt.
Was he making his sukkah the day after Yom Kippur?
Most likely. Yeah. So based on this story, we have an even stronger question on the story of the 5th and 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. How are we supposed to understand the father's words when he says, only now, after Yom Kippur, that's when we can start to do tshuva? This is the Rebbe's question as well. Our Rebbe, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he asks, or he explains, a person is in control of himself and can establish that he has not certainly committed sin, which would require a standard sin offering. But in discussion of doubt, one cannot be certain that he did not misstep. Rather, there remains room for doubt. Perhaps a precept has been violated. Therefore, in this Talmudic tale, Baba ben Buta would bring an Asham Talui every day. But Yom Kippur precludes and nullifies the whole concept of sin, even the very possibility of sin, to the extent that the Torah dictates that there's no need for an Asham Talui. So how then can we say that on the day after Yom Kippur, we must do tshuva? Yom Kippur eradicates the very notion of sin. So this is the Rebbe's, strengthening the question and presenting the question of this story of doing tshuva. All right, so we have a few questions now about the connection between Yom Kippur and Succos, and how is it that Yom Kippur leads to Succos, and what is the nature of the tshuva of Yom Kippur, and then it leads to Succos, and the celebration of Succos, and building a sukkah. And then we have this story of the Rebbe's where only after Yom Kippur, that's when we can do tshuva. All right. So we're going to have to try to establish a thematic connection between Yom Kippur and Succos. We showed how in Jewish law there is a practical connection. You go from one to the next when it comes to building sukkahs, building a sukkah. But what's the thematic connection? Now, on Yom Kippur, we said it's the time of atonement, right? As we just got done establishing, this is the time of atonement. Now, let's see this inside the verses. Also in the book of Vayikra, chapter 16, verse 30. It says, for this, which was what we learned last week also, if you remember, chapter 16, verses 30 through 32, we learned, on this day he shall effect atonement for you to cleanse you. Before God you shall be cleansed from all your sins. Now, there's a debate in the Talmud as to exactly how does Yom Kippur work. Meaning, what exactly is the power of atonement that's present? What's possible? What are the limits of the atonement of Yom Kippur? Meaning, how does it work? So one way of describing the debate is that we could say, does the day itself atone? And you just show up and it's automatic? Or is Yom Kippur like a closing step that requires something to be done before? So right now I told you we're in this Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and we're preparing ourselves for Yom Kippur. So imagine we weren't going to a class, right? Imagine we weren't doing the work of preparing ourselves for Yom Kippur. Does it work the same for people who don't prepare as it does for people who do? This is the debate back and forth that the rabbis had about how exactly does Yom Kippur work. So Maimonides was following this debate. He is a student of the Talmud and wrote a code of Jewish law based on the debates of the Talmud, and he rules as a point of law in text 5b, the very day of Yom Kippur atones, and he qualifies, for those who repent. As it is stated, this day will atone for you. So the way Maimonides is explaining is that there is a requirement to do personal work. You have to do your own tshuva if you repent. And then, after you repent, there'll be like what's called a Yom Kippur bonus. And the bonus of Yom Kippur will atone for those of you who did the work. So the question is, why do we need both? Why do we need to do both levels of work? If we need to do the tshuva, then maybe it should be enough that we have tshuva. And if we can't get it done with tshuva, then if we can't get it done with tshuva and we need Yom Kippur, then it seems like the strength of Yom Kippur should be great enough without the work of tshuva, right? So it's like, why do we need both? So in text 5c, the Kli Yakar explains, and from the verse in 5a, it says, from the words, before God shall be cleansed from all your sins. So the Kli Yakar explains on that verse, for Yom Kippur atones only for the penitent. Before God cleanses, a person must first purify himself of any taint of sin from head to toe. Therefore it states, before God you shall be cleansed from all your sins. The word before, lifnei, which in this context normally means in front of, also means prior to. meaning that before the advent of the great and awesome day of God, you shall purify yourselves through tshuva. Following that, he will purify you by atonement. Now, this explains that this is what we call in Talmudic language called gezeres hakasuv. It says, how does this make sense? And the gezeres hakasuv means because the verse says so. It's like, so if we ask the question, how does it work? Why do you need 2 steps? He said, well, we need 2 steps because the verse says lifnei. So it's like, well, it doesn't make sense. If I need to do the work, then what do I need Yom Kippur for? And if you need Yom Kippur, then what does it matter what work I do? Why do we need both? Because the verse says lifnei. But why? How does it work? So from this question of how does it work, to understand that beyond just that because God said so, one approach we could take is the idea that there are, let's call it, 2 levels of atonement. Now, the first level of atonement, the first level of kapara, is what is accomplished through our own work of tshuva. Right? We talked about this I believe in last week's class. We talked about in previous classes where you have the idea of tshuva. What is tshuva? So let's say a person was dishonest. Let's say that was their sin this year. They had an opportunity, they had a challenge to whether they were going to tell the truth or not, and they failed. So that's wrong. That's why. So they know that they were dishonest. So they have to go to the person that they lied to, and they have to say, I lied, and I feel terrible that I lied to you, and I know that it's wrong, and I don't want to ever do it again. Please forgive me. And so that recognition and that verbal confession and that resolution never to do it again, that is tshuva. And that's hard work, right? And that's like the worst thing, right? When you're a kid and your parents catch you doing something wrong and they make you go and apologize to the person you did it wrong to. It's terrifying to face our failings. So this is the work of tshuva. So the first level of atonement is that which we can accomplish on our own level. Now, this type of tshuva, this type of atonement can happen any day of the year. This service of tshuva is available to us all the time. But then there's a higher level of atonement. There's a level which is beyond what we can accomplish. This is a tshuva, this is a repair that only God can accomplish. And Yom Kippur is a unique day, it's a unique window into this higher level of tshuva. But it's kind of like going up in a higher level in your house. In order to get there, you've got to go as high as you can up the stairs. And then, because of a special day, you might get picked up higher. But if you're still waiting on the ground, there's no access to this higher level of atonement. Now, so what does it mean, atonement? So this atonement, this repair, this kapara, is atonement for the relationship that the soul has with God. So if we say that there are 2 levels of atonement, these 2 levels correspond to 2 dimensions of the relationship with the soul and God. So the first level of the first dimension of the relationship, which corresponds to the first level of tshuva, the first dimension of this relationship is, let's call it the active dimension in our relationship with God, the soul to God. So we learn Torah, right? We learn God's wisdom. And we pray. And we do mitzvahs. We do, what God wants us to do. These are all the things that we are actively doing to make a relationship with God. Now we can see this, it's like any relationship, the more we do, the more active we are in a relationship, the deeper is the bond. And conversely, the more you do to hurt the relationship, the worse off it is, right? That's one resolution that a lot of people make. I want to be a better son, I want to be a better husband, I want to be a better father, I want to be a better whatever it is, better friend. When it comes to this level of a relationship, you have to be involved. You have to be active. And the more you do, the deeper it is. So that first level of tshuva corresponds to the first dimension of our relationship with God. I should have been learning Torah and doing mitzvahs and praying and doing all these things to have a deep relationship with God. And I didn't. I messed it up. So I could fix it by doing tshuva. So on the active dimension of the relationship, that's where our tshuva on level 1 applies. But then, now the example that Chassidus brings for this, to understand this level of relationship, is like the relationship between a teacher and a student. When the teacher gives instruction to the student, do this, do that, do this, and the student listens to the instructions and follows the directions, then that deepens the bond, right? The teacher can give more to the student as a result of them following the instructions. Now, and the other way around, just like that's why the metaphor is useful. If the student doesn't listen to the directions and doesn't do what the teacher wants, then the relationship is strained, right? That's the metaphor relationships to understand this first level. Now, the second level, second dimension of the relationship between the soul and God is an inherent bond. It's a place that's essential because the soul itself is godliness. It is God. So that bond is inherent. It can't be touched, not for good and not for bad, by what we do. And it's not any more there because we learned Torah this year, and it's not any less there if we fail to. It's an inherent bond. Now, this relationship example, and so this is the example of a parent and a child. Now, on the surface level, again, a parent and a child have a first level. I do what I say, and as a parent, and it'll be good, right? And if we spend quality time together, then the relationship will be deeper and bonded. But the difference between a parent and a child, and a teacher and a student, is that the parent and the child have an essential bond, just like the soul and God. The child is always your child, regardless if they listen to you or not. There's nothing they can do to make themselves more your child or less your child. They're always your child just by nature of who they are. That's why this is the metaphor for the second level of the dimension of the soul to God. That the second level is that no matter what, the soul is one with godliness. So it's this higher level, this inherent bond of the soul to godliness, that's the level of tshuva that we can't reach on our own. And that's the level of tshuva which is available on Yom Kippur. So it's only when you've done everything you can, so to say, and to repair the work, we saw from the previous text, on the surface level of the relationship, the first level of the relationship with the soul and God, that's when you can come to Yom Kippur prepared so that you can access the level of tshuva, which is the essence of your soul. And the way the essence of your soul is inherently bound with God in a perfect oneness. And that's something you couldn't reach by yourself. There's nothing you can do to get there. But it's not available to you unless, as we see from the verse, unless you did the work first of Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur reveals this deeper dimension. Now, with this in mind, this begins to answer one of our questions. And we're going to answer one of our questions through an interesting story. So this is a story, kind of a long story. It's like 4 slides long, this story, but it's an interesting story. Let's see how it works. It says, I have heard in the name of Rav Sadia Gaon that one of his students came to visit him one night and found him rolling in the snow. Now, just to explain what this means, is that in certain approaches to Jewish spiritual development, there's an idea that through self-imposed affliction, physical affliction, you can purify the soul. You can purify the soul's experience. So that's what's going on over here. Right? He's rolling in the snow. He's not crazy. This was once a spiritual path. So bewildered and shocked, the student asked, Rebbe, do you, God forbid, need atonement? That you need to afflict yourself? And if your honor, who all your life have refrained from any taint or thought of sin, must indeed torture yourself like this, what of we, who are like lowly hyssops growing on a wall, full of the sins of our youth? What are we going to do? Why, all forms of pain and suffering and bitter affliction will not be enough. His teacher answered, know that I never used to engage in such behavior. For I always knew that I have never committed such a sin to warrant this affliction. But I learned this from that which occurred by a certain innkeeper for whom I once stayed. He didn't know I was a Torah scholar. He hosted me as he would host anyone else. Later, word got out that I was in the city, and all the townspeople, men, women, and children, gathered there to honor me, as is the custom of the Jewish people who cherish the honor of Torah scholars. They accorded me great honor, spoke my praises, and attended to me greatly. When the innkeeper saw this, he too began to treat me with tremendous honor, respect, and glory, according to his means and beyond. When the time came to leave, and the entire community came to escort me, the innkeeper fell before me and cried, pleading with me, "Please, Your Honor, forgive me for not honoring you as I should have." I said to him, "But you accorded me all this great honor, to the best of your ability. What more could you possibly have done?" To which he answered, "I seek your forgiveness for the beginning of your stay, when I was unaware of your greatness. At that time, I did not honor you as I should have, but as I would have treated anyone else. Therefore, I fall before you and seek your forgiveness." So these words, this is how they're going to continue. He says, "These words enter the depths of my heart. If, for the honor of flesh and blood, this man fell before me in an earnest plea to forgive him for the past, how much more so when it comes to the greatness of the Creator? Today, my understanding and appreciation of God is much greater than in the past. My godly service, my awe and fear of Him have grown according to my understanding. So for the past, I beg forgiveness. And I afflict myself like this so that He forgives me for my paltry service of the past. Knowing God I do now, my past actions trouble me deeply. And this is not just a general tshuva for the past. For each day I understand more and more of God's greatness, and my service to Him constantly grows. Each day I regret and do complete tshuva for the previous day. Knowing God as I do today, yesterday's service of God was insufficient." So this approach, that there's like the surface dimension of our relationship with God. There's what we learn and what we pray and what we do with our mitzvahs. And then there's this essence. There's this perfect bond of the soul to God. If that's revealed on Yom Kippur and we realize the heights that we could attain, that's why the Rebbe Rashad told his son, now you can start to do tshuva. This story helps us understand, because we can become who we truly are meant to be, who we are in our essence. And every day, we're even though we grow from day to day, we're not operating on the level that we should be. Now, this is something which a person can appreciate coming from Yom Kippur. But for the year, we're too distracted to do tshuva, right? Someone calls you up 3 months from now in the middle of the week, out of nowhere, someone you haven't heard from in a while, and says, "Come join me, we're going to go do tshuva." You're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, you have an essence of your soul, I want to meet you, and we're going to really work on this. I'm like, come on, I've got an appointment. I have a show I need to watch. I'm in the middle of a book. Whatever it is, and you're not into it. But on Yom Kippur, when there's this moment, when you have the revelation of this essence of the soul, the deepest dynamic of how we're truly a child to God, and no matter what we have, that's when we're in the mood to do tshuva. The problem is that this Yom Kippur mood, this Yom Kippur revelation, doesn't last. I said earlier tonight, lots of moods when you make resolutions, right? January 1st is such a mood, your birthday is such a mood, a wedding anniversary is another mood, a yard site might be such a mood, and then we make all these resolutions, and then once the inspiration is gone, unfortunately, so too are the resolutions. So why does it work like that? What can we do to capture the inspiration? Now, the fact that we fail to stay inspired from Yom Kippur is actually a design of the soul, let's call it. There's an anatomy of the soul. So when we talk about the soul, there's different levels of the soul. There's different ways that the soul works with our experience. So the active part of the soul that gives life to our physical experience, our intellect and our emotions and our capabilities, our physical capabilities, that part of the soul is the level of soul that's like the standard connection that is housed in the body. Now this standard connection is the first dimension we spoke of. It's the relationship we have with God that gets stronger by what we do. And it gets weaker by what we fail to do. But the part that is inherently bound up with God, essentially one with God, that part isn't present in our day-to-day bodily experience. It doesn't talk the language of the body. It's more abstract. It's less part of our conscious reality. We talk about it in mystical terms. It doesn't even rest in the body. It's too high to rest in the body, and it rests higher and near its source. So there, because it doesn't drive your thoughts and your emotions and your actions, that's why when it comes to capitalizing on your inspiration to do better, that level which is so inspired on Yom Kippur, it can't do better because it doesn't do. The part that does is the first level and doesn't get inspired by this revelation of essence. So, is this explaining experience that you guys had? So, this is the same fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Shalom Dov Ber. So he wrote a Hasidic treatise, a pamphlet of essays called Kuntras HaAvodah. The pamphlet, the treatise on spiritual service. So in the fifth chapter there in Kuntras HaAvodah, there's a section over here which describes this phenomenon. And it says, many people experience an awakening during the high holidays. Even the God-fearing who on Rosh Hashanah and in Yom Kippur are roused from the depths of their souls to tshuva and acceptance of God's command and are very pained by their remoteness from God, even such a person may resolve at that time to accept God's sovereignty and submit completely to Him for the entire coming year, to toil in the study of Torah and the observance of mitzvahs, and yet, as time passes, he may return to his materiality and his ordinary nature, each according to his personality. For this awakening, though it is true in the soul, it remains in an abstract state. It's not actually felt in the person's faculties to affect actual deeds. The pain and bitterness, which means the remorse for his sin and the acceptance of God's sovereignty, do not affect him internally so as to act upon it. So this essence arousal, the second dimension, which is uniquely available in Yom Kippur, it gets lost in translation to the part of our soul that actually does all the work. In order for it to be translated in a way that we capture the inspiration, another step is necessary. Now the Talmud talks about what we call the Chassidim Rishonim, the first Chassidim. Now they don't mean like what we mean, where the Baal Shem Tov started Chassidus and now you have Chassidim, a couple hundred years later. They mean like a similar term, but a little different. And so it describes this category of people called the Chassidim Rishonim. And it describes something that they knew about this challenge of motivation. And what they knew about this challenge of motivation impacted the way that they pray. So the next text says that the early Chassidim Rishonim would spend time 1 hour before praying, pray for an hour, and spend another hour afterwards. So, and they pray 3 times a day. So that's 9 hours of prayer a day. Now, what does this mean? Okay, so So first you have preparation. Now that we can understand, right? If you can think back to a time when you really got it, when you really connected to prayer, and you really had a moving experience in prayer, most likely, if you think backwards, there was some type of preparation that went into it. It's either some kind of life event that got you in the right frame of mind, or you learned something that got you in the right frame of mind, or maybe even you sat and contemplated to prepare yourself like they're describing here. The preparation we understand. Now, and then, if we've ever had such a thing, then you have the experience of elevated awareness, elevated understanding within prayer. But what's not so clear is what's with the last hour. Why, after sitting for an hour davening and connecting, why do you need to sit for another hour? Right? Anybody ever done this? Anyone ever sat after prayer and said, now that I prayed, let me just sit and for another hour afterwards? So the answer to what they're doing, the insight these Chassidim Rishonim had, is that a person may be spiritually aroused. A person may even want to be better as a result of some spiritual experience. But the next step is implementation. You have to come up with a plan to do something with the inspiration. You have to devise a practical plan of action to implement your inspiration. And this answers another one of our questions, which is, what's the connection of Yom Kippur and Sukkos? So once we created this table of that there's two levels of tshuva which correspond to two dimensions of the soul's relationship with God, that helps us understand why you have to do tshuva even after Yom Kippur. But that understanding of how great Yom Kippur is brings us to this phenomenon of unique inspiration, right? Yom Kippur is the moment where we get in touch with the essence of the soul. That there's no higher, more unique form of inspiration spiritually than what we experience on Yom Kippur. So now we can begin to understand the answer, which is, why do we have to go immediately from Yom Kippur into Sukkos? What's the thematic connection that one leads to the next? So with this Talmudic story of the Chassidim Rishonim, we now have an answer. That you have to prepare, that's true. You have to experience, that's true, and that we understand. But the big lesson is that third step, the step of implementation. This is where Sukkos comes in. Now, this is a verse which is quoted from Tehillim, and it's quoted in order to explain the answer to the connection of Yom Kippur to Sukkos and Chassidus. First, the verse in the 81st chapter of Tehillim says, Tiku b'chodesh shofar, sound the shofar on the new month, and on the appointed time for the day of our festival. Now, the word for on the appointed time of our festival, v'kesa b'yom chagenu, the kesa, the word appointed, could also mean from the word kisui, which means to cover or conceal. So that's the next Hasidic explanation of that verse. There's a popular explanation of the verse on the appointed time for the festival, that what on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is concealed, that is revealed on Sukkos. It follows that the divine service of dwelling in this sukkah is the revelation of the tshuva that took place on Yom Kippur. So this big high level, this level which we wouldn't be able to reach on our own, through our own divine service of tshuva, we get this amazing glimpse of the essential bond of the soul to God, but we can't translate it, right? It's in a different language. We can't turn it into practical service because it's hidden. It's not something that we can think about or feel. And then we can't use it to do. So Sukkot comes along and reveals that hidden thing. Now, what does it mean? It reveals it. So how do we do that? By building, that's our last answer, our last insight, we do that by building a sukkah. Now, what is a sukkah? The sukkah is a structure. It gives space. It gives boundaries and limits to this essential revelation and puts it into our terms. It puts it into our terms of a space. Now, in Chassidus, it describes that the way this is actually a two-step process. You first have to take it from this essential revelation, which we have no language for. We draw it down first into the schach, the roof, and that is what we call makif. It's surrounding us. And then the next mitzvah is we take the lulav and esrog and we shake it, and that draws it down from the surrounding level of revelation and draws it into our inner experience. Now, but to start this, but the key insight for tonight's class is that we have to start this process right away. By acting on the inspiration, which is a key step, we have to act and do something. We create a dimension to hold it. And then we can hold it and bring it into ourselves. But another important thing is not only to do, but we have to do right away while you're inspired. Okay, that's going to bring us to the last step, how to hold on to motivation, how to take inspiration and turn it into something real. All right, by that we're going to ask one last question. Now the question we're going to ask over here is, if you're telling me all these great things, come on, listen, it's Elul and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you do all this work, and what do we get? The big payoff on Yom Kippur, we get the revelation of the essence of the soul, the oneness of God, right? This is the secret of everything. And I'm telling you that if you act fast, right, urgency, act now, limited time offer, you can tap into an infinite inspiration to be an all new person, to the person you're supposed to be, your essence. What do I do? Build something. Build a box to put that inspiration into and make it yours. So if you were going to think, what kind of box would you build? If I told you I could take you on a journey to experience the essence of who you are, and I would give you infinite inspiration to be a better person, that could translate it into actions that you would be a real better person. And I'd say all you have to do is build a box. So what kind of box would you build? Now, kind of extending the metaphor, if you're going to give me something to hold infinity, then it better not leak,
Right.
It should be spectacular. It should be fortified. It should be beautiful. It should be, like, serious, right? Like, think about it. Like, the thing that came into my mind just now is I had a conversation over with somebody about cell phones, and about how now the plans aren't subsidized anymore. You have to actually buy the whole phone, and so much money, and they're talking about it, and it's like, oh, but what happens if you drop it and break it and this and that? So then they were saying, well, you could get a really good case because you're spending a few $100 on your phone, and it's so important to your life. So think about it. If I'm going to give you the new iPhone, like, what kind of case are you going to put the new iPhone in? A good one, right? And the new iPhone's nothing compared to me giving you the essence of your soul and infinite inspiration to be who you're supposed to be. What kind of case would you put that in? So the question is, the mitzvah that we do, sukkah, it's not a great case. It's flimsy,
Yeah.
It's made out of wood, and it leaks. And the roof is made out of branches, and they blow away. We build a temporary structure right after Yom Kippur. We're jumping from one mitzvah to the next. We build the sukkah, and it's a box. It's quite literally a box made out of wood. What's going on? Why do we build temporary structure? Now, so this question is in the text that we see in front of you. The first text is from when we eat a meal during Succos. We have a special harachaman. We have an extra harachaman. We ask Hashem to bless us. We say, harachaman, may the merciful one restore for us the fallen sukkah of David. So we're speaking now metaphorically that the Davidic monarchy, the reign of Jewish kingdom fell. It's a fallen sukkah. And we're asking Hashem to restore the fallen sukkah, restore the monarchy, the rightful rule of the Davidic dynasty. Now, the next thing that we say over here, text 11 explains that this is a very strange metaphor. We're going to talk about a dynasty and a monarchy. Again, what kind of place do you put your king in? You put your king in a palace. You put your monarchy in a place of splendor. So why are we using the metaphor of a sukkah to explain the monarchy of King David? So text 11 picks up on that question and explains. It says, note that the kingdom of David is called a sukkah. A typical kingdom would be referred to as a house, a sturdy structure, representative of the kingdom's might and stability. However, a house, once it is destroyed, ceases to exist. Rebuild it and you have a different entity, a new house, something different. A sukkah, however, which is not a permanent building, can easily be put back into position. Therefore, even if it falls, it can be renewed while maintaining its previous status. Right? When you call it a temporary dwelling, it blows over. That's exactly what a temporary dwelling is supposed to do. And you put it back up, it's still just a temporary dwelling. Likewise, the kingdom of David, which stands to be rebuilt after its fall. It is called the fallen sukkah of David. Even at the time of its fall, it is called a sukkah. For a sukkah can quickly and easily be reestablished. It's giving a psychological insight into how to make lasting change from motivation. When you build something sturdy, when I set you up and said, what would you build to hold, infinite inspiration? If you chose to build something sturdy, when it falls down, it's gone. Because it was supposed to be sturdy, right? When it falls down, whatever it was supposed to be, it isn't anymore. But if whatever you're going to rebuild from that is something new. Now this sukkah, this temporary thing, this is the story of the Jewish people. This is the humble description of the Jewish people. We're still here. It's a miracle of history that there should be a class in the year 2016 in West Bloomfield, Michigan, of a group of Jews getting together and talking about what happened to King David and what Moses commanded the Jewish people in the desert and the revelation of God on Mount Sinai. It's a miracle of history. All the great nations that have come into the grandeur of history and they're gone. And here we are, removed from our home, speaking English in West Bloomfield with PowerPoint slides and like that, and we're talking about King David. So we're this, on the one hand, we're this humble nation, like a sukkah. But on the other hand, our endurance is miraculous. The fact that we're here attests to the miraculous nature of our being. Now, that's the next verse. It says, not because you're more numerous than any people did God delight in you and choose you, for you are the least of all the people. And this is the story of Jewish history. We're broken down, we get scattered like the walls and the schach of a fallen sukkah, and then we get put back together somewhere else, maybe it's Spain, or maybe it's Poland, maybe it's America, maybe it's Northern Africa, wherever it is, our sukkah gets built back together, and then there we are. Now the same thing, lesson for the inspiration, the same thing is true of each and every one of our own personal lives. See, we're sure to stumble. We're sure to make mistakes. But when we have our inspiration, and our inspiration gets interrupted, if we thought of ourselves, or if we thought of our structure of our lives as this great sturdy building, and when we fell over, then who are we? What are we? But if instead we think of ourselves as a sukkah, then when we stumble, when we fail, we can regroup. we can rebuild. The inspiration isn't lost. So when it says how to capture this, and infinite inspiration of Yom Kippur, how to capture it, you capture by building a humble sukkah. That's the next text. It says, from Yom Kippur until Succos, the Jewish people are preoccupied with mitzvahs. One with his sukkah, another one with his lulav, and on the first day of Succos, the Jewish people stand before God with their lulavs and esrogs for his sake. And he says to them, what is past has passed. Let us start the count from now. And therefore, Moshe enjoins the Jewish people to take the lulav and esrog on the first day, meaning the first day for the accounting of sins. If our holidays followed a year which wasn't perfect, and we get this inspiration, that's exactly the reason why we build a sukkah. We get this inspiration, we have these resolutions, and if we were to build something, if we were to do nothing, then we would just go right back to our old habits. This high level of spiritual inspiration would be lost. Because as soon as we face work again, as soon as we face our responsibilities and our old challenges, we find ourselves falling back right into our old habits, our old patterns. So what we need to do, what the lesson is for us to do, is to build a sukkah. Invest our inspiration into something that can be rebuilt. A reconstructible hut. And if you build it into something that can be rebuilt, then there's hope. So the message of spending 7 days out in the wild in this falling over box, and with leaves and branches as your protection, is to show us the practical advice that in times of inspiration, we need to invest in small resolutions. I'll give you an example. You might come learning Torah, right? That's a big one. We do it all year, and it's a big mitzvah, and it's a big way to grow spiritually. So you come Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and you're inspired. You say, I'm going to learn the whole Talmud. The rabbi keeps quoting from the Talmud, and I know that it's great, and it's great stuff. So I'm going to learn the whole Talmud. That's my resolution. I'm going to become a Talmud Chacham, right? That's not a sukkah. That is a big, beautiful house. Mm-hmm. Now what will happen is you're now 2 weeks after Yom Kippur. It's a Tuesday. And you're already 2 days into work. You come home and you're tired, right? You had a bad day. Not only do you have a bad day, but now it's dark at night when you drive home from work, so it's not so inspiring. Your energy level is low. And dinner's not so good. It wasn't so tasty, so you're doubly disappointed. You had a hard day, and it was dark, and now dinner's bad, and now you're dealing with this much inspiration, and you're getting ready to learn Gemara, or your daily allocation of Talmud in order to learn the whole thing. You get a phone call, and someone has some distraction on the other line. You take the phone call. Now what? Too late. I'll get it tomorrow. And I got to go to bed because I have an appointment early in the morning. It's a big day. And then that happens again and again. You go a few days like this. 3 days in, only 2 weeks after Yom Kippur, how are you going to finish the whole Talmud? Not going to happen. It's too big for me. I'm not going to do it. I'm not somebody who can learn the whole Talmud. So you fall right back into your old patterns. And so maybe next year, by the time comes Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you'll resolve again to learn the whole Talmud. Tractate, whatever is a big, ambitious goal. So instead, what the lesson of a sukkah tells us is, make up that you'll learn 15 minutes a week more than you do for a month. That means 1 extra hour over the next month that you're going to learn. So then what happens, your same scenario, I don't have to repeat all the details, the same scenario, you get that phone call, 15 minutes you can do before you go to bed. And if you didn't, you'll do it tomorrow, and then you can get to 15 minutes. And that way, even if you fail once or twice, you can build it right back up like a sukkah. 15 minutes, an hour over a month. And then you have an inspiration that changes you. Because then you realize, I could learn 15 minutes a week, 15 minutes extra every week. This I could do. And after 1 month, you have a new habit. You have a new pattern to fall back on. So now, just like you would fall back on your old bad habits, you've now acquired a good habit that you can build on. So what the message of the mitzvah of Sukkah coming from Yom Kippur is that we need these moments of inspiration. And there's no greater time than Yom Kippur for the moments of inspiration. But the inspiration of Yom Kippur is too much for us to do anything with. So we have to, in order to channel it into real change, we have to take action. We have to build something. We have to make a box to hold it. But if you build a grand box, that's the secret to failure. The secret to success is small, practical changes, things that you can do. So that even if it gets blown over, like the sukkah, you can build it right back up without any loss. That's the answer of why Yom Kippur precedes Sukkot, and what the lesson of how to take moments of inspiration. Now, again, it doesn't only mean Yom Kippur. You could be inspired a little bit every day. But what it's telling us is that when you are inspired, you have to take action immediately. Just like it said, you shouldn't let it go even one night without getting involved in building a sukkah. So really the secret of making consistent growth and change in life is to take advantage of all the moments of inspiration. The two secrets are act right away and small and practical. And that is the lesson of building a sukkah immediately following the holiday of Yom Kippur. All right, any questions?
This expression I remember from business, it was from one of the sales training classes. It was, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
And the answer was, small bites, just like you do everything else. It's like every other meal you finish. And this is the exact same parallel.
Yeah.
You know, small bites that you can finish.
One bite at a time.
Right.
Yeah. I heard a nice saying, right? And I just talked with me, and I'll share it because it has the same kind of concept as what this class is about. It says that people tend to overestimate what they can accomplish in a day and underestimate what they can accomplish in a year.
Yeah.
And it's the same idea. Instead of building a great big house for yourself every day and then destroying your opportunity to make positive habits and changes, be practical on a day-to-day basis, and by acquiring good habits and good practices, every time that you experience inspiration, then you can accomplish a tremendous amount in a year. If you try to accomplish the whole year's worth of work in one day, then you'll fail and you'll just go back to your old habits.
Well, like the example you gave us before, like how did you learn so much? And somebody said in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 5 minutes that you could give away waiting online, you could use it. Exactly. Yeah. So take that. That's like being proactive to find the moments of inspiration, and then transform them into real change. All right. Everyone should have a blessed holiday season. We're coming now to the high time. Yom Kippur will be next week, and then Sukkot. So the only thing I would say, I guess, by way of a commercial, is that we have our Sukkah holiday, coming up, and then the Sukkah, the first night, we have a celebration all together. The Sukkah under the stars here in Shul. So I saw they jumped the gun even before Yom Kippur. It's already built in the back of the Shul, so it's all ready for you guys. So if you want to join all together in the celebration, then you can plan to join us the first night of Sukkot here at the Shul.
It's funny to see the sukkah up every year. It gets put up by a professional.
Yeah.
I remember the first year, it was Neil and I trying.